The Song of the Violinist by Mary Palladino. The snow falls, the wind howls, and the moon rises to console the stars. Few could see the cold imagery of the mind, many are blind. They ignore the inside storm. They only look at what they want to see, the outside, vibrant colors and the melodies that the violinist creates. In a sleepy little village some time ago, in an old cottage on the hill, there lived a man. Every soul in the village knew of this man. He would go into the less sleepy parts of town and play his violin. His playing was so entrancing that the ears that heard his song would stop what they were doing and get lost in the song of the violinist. It sounded like something out of a dream of serendipity. Not only was he a violinist, but also an artist. He would paint the most beautiful pictures of surreal landscapes, eye-opening shapes and colors, and photographic portraits. If you were to step into his gallery, you would feel the stares of eyes going down your spine. Often the villagers would ask the violinist, "Why do you play? Why do you paint?" He would answer, "I do these things out of love. It makes me feel alive." One day, a visitor came to the village. She had heard all about the violinist and had traveled from afar to see him. As it turns out, she was a host of one of the biggest arts competitions of the time, and the violinist was invited to compete. "Who, me?" the violinist asked, astonished. "Truly, I am not who you are looking for. I am not rich or famous. How can this be?" "I know who I traveled to see," the host replied. "Paint something spectacular, compose something extravagant, then come find me." The villagers expressed their excitement for the violinist. They wanted him to join the competition. With all this support, how could he not? That night, the violinist went through his many papers of compositions. He was proud of a lot of them, and thought about which one he should use for the competition. Summer Rain in F major, Twilight Symphony in E flat minor. He just couldn't decide. After a while, he decided to examine his paintings instead. His walls were packed with paintings, and his gallery contained even more. But, like his songs, the violinist could not decide. He thought, and then it hit him. He should create something new. He would compose a new creation of love, or paint another sky for someone far away. He pulled out his violin and played a few scales for inspiration. He wrote some notes on his sheet. He played some more but stopped in the middle. His song was not turning out the way he wanted it to. He did not want to get frustrated, so he set down his violin and picked up a canvas. He sketched out a quick idea and started to paint. However, the colors did not look like how he imagined them in his head. He tried again, but it got worse. "Maybe I just need some rest," the violinist thought to himself. And that is exactly what he did. The following day, the violinist went into the village and tried to play his songs like he used to. His hands shook, and the rod was at war with the strings. The villagers looked on with confusion. "What is happening to our talented violinist?" they asked amongst themselves. "Does he not work well under pressure?" The pressure was nothing to the violinist. No one could view the storm on the inside. Days went by, and the violinist slowly got worse. Crumpled papers piled, and innocent canvases were slaughtered. 3 villagers, meanwhile, knew there was something wrong with their hero. "This is ridiculous," the arrogant villager grunted. "The violinist is losing his luster." "Nonsense, shame on you," the beamish villager gasped. "Our violinist is simply not feeling well." "Perhaps," the introspective villager mused. "He is still grieving." After a pause, the beamish villager nodded in agreement. "I miss her too." That night, the violinist went into his gallery, something he had not done in a while, and he looked upon a painting with disheartened eyes. It was a painting of a woman. If one didn't know better, they would say it was a goddess. She had blonde hair, chestnut eyes, and no one deserved her. Until sleep would finally overcome his dejected mind, the violinist wept tears of a broken song. When the violinist woke, he noticed he was no longer in the walls of his home. He was lying in lush verdure. Wind softly blew, the sun was lagom, flowers waved to the sky, and all was peacefully silent. Confused, the violinist stood up and viewed his surroundings. These were not the valleys of the village, he realized, but something about them was very familiar. As he looked longer, it occurred to him that this place looked like a world from his artworks. He remembered this painting from not long ago, where the melody resides. But why was he brought here? He wondered to himself. Who brought him here? His stream of consciousness trailed off when his ears caught a faint sound of delicate notes in the air. It was coming from the woods and seemed to be calling his soul. Of course, his motive was to answer this summon and follow this Selkut's song. The music became more mystical with each step. When he finally reached the heart of the wood, he found a woman, his lost darling, playing her cello as she did years ago. How she was good at playing that gorgeous instrument in her lifetime. And for the violinist to hear it again was a blessing, a sorrowful joy. How beautiful she was, playing her passion perfectly. She was like a goddess from above. Euterpe, Hera, or perhaps Athena. The violinist closed his eyes and breathed it all in, for it would be a long time before he would hear the melody of the cellist again. Her song was calling the violinist back to life, the life he had long ago, and the life he longed for. Before he knew it, everything was gone. He was back in his gallery as if nothing happened. But the song in his heart remained. His darling was hanging above him, with a cheery smile on her face that whispered, "Right." And he did. He wrote down every note he heard in his vision, and he painted everything he saw. His pencil glided across the paper as he composed. His brush danced across the canvas, leaving lambent colors in its path. A song of the violinist might not be worthy for the world, but a song of the cellist is. He performed the cellist's song in the street for the host to hear, and he had truly never felt more alive playing it. The village came down, and the host was in awe. She has never heard, and will never hear anything like it. The violinist played the cellist's ballad, and he presented his artwork. A goddess in her cello, with pride in the competition. But did he win? I cannot tell you. I can tell you, however, that the violinist was wrong. Every note he ever played, every piece he ever painted did make the cellist happy. They were fit for her because love was weaved in the canvases and written in his songs. Over time, the violinist's time in the village came to a close. He was missed by many, but the villagers were happy, knowing that the violinist and the cellist were reunited. Some say at night, if you listen with your heart, you could still hear a violin playing under the moonlight. Listen harder and you might also hear a cello. Very few people know this, but everyone in that little village knows maestros don't die. They become music. Their legacies will not die either. The violinist's son has come to the village, and he now plays his viola for all to hear, in honor of his late father and mother. Indeed, wherever this family goes, the melody will follow. The Chocolate Caperer by Kira Dyer. It was supposed to be an easy mission, get the goods, return to base. It should have been as simple as that. It was hardly brain surgery. Unfortunately, 9-year-olds aren't exactly super elite agents. It was my 9th birthday party. I decided to have a sleepover, and my mom had allowed me to invite 4 people. So I'd chosen my 2 best friends and 2 of my cousins. We were quite the motley crew. First, there was Emma, my best friend. We'd known each other since kindergarten and did everything together. She had black curly hair that she always kept cut shoulder length and a huge My Little Pony obsession that she'd passed on to me. At the time we were still holding on to our shared dream of starting a horse ranch together. Yes, we were that kind of horse girl. Unfortunately, my other friend Audrey, an intelligent strawberry blonde girl with the memory of an elephant, was unable to attend due to an event at her family's temple. They were Jewish. Maybe if she'd been there, the whole thing would have gone much more smoothly. She had more brain cells than the rest of us combined. Lauren, my cousin who was older than me by a little less than a year, was the planner. If we decided to do something, Lauren would plan every step to the last second. She'd brush her curtain of long, dark hair behind her shoulder and get right to business. Alyssa, Lauren's younger sister, was her second in command, but if she didn't want to follow orders, she would make it extremely obvious. Her curly brown hair and bubbly personality was the antithesis of Lauren's. She and I loved to match with each other more than with our own sisters. We wore matching teal nightgowns with an ice cream cone print to bed that night and identical sunset orange t-shirts the following day. My little sister Haley was the last guest. Even though I hadn't invited her, My mother compelled me to include Haley in every activity. Funnily enough, it was actually her idea to go through with the chocolate caper. Much to my disappointment, nobody else wanted to watch The Sound of Music, a movie, according to my mother, that I'd memorized at the age of 2, thanks to my great-grandmother who always put it on when she watched me at her house while my mother was at work. Therefore, we retreated to the bedroom Haley and I shared to turn our bunk bed into a fort. I designated Haley's bunk, the bottom one, as our headquarters. Why? Haley asked. It was her favorite word, and every time I heard her ask it I felt a piece of my soul die. Because I said so. I told her. That response usually worked, but since we had company, Haley wasn't ready to concede so quickly this time. She narrowed her blue-gray eyes at me, put her hands defiantly on her hips, and declared, "Mommy says you're not the boss of me." I knew this was true, but I was a manipulative little turd. And with our guests intently watching the exchange, I wasn't going to back down and lose my authority as the birthday girl. I retorted, "It's my party, and that makes me the boss tonight." Haley pouted like a 4-year-old, which she was, and let us use her bunk as our headquarters. We hung our blankets down from the top bunk, which had been established by Lauren as our lookout tower, then climbed one by one into Haley's bed. We spent 2 or 3 minutes staring at each other excitedly. None of us had ever made a fort before. After those first minutes were up, we started to get bored. We'd left our stuffed animals in the living room where we'd be sleeping that night, and nobody wanted to go and get them, leaving nothing for us to do. Haley was the first to voice her opinion, since she had no filter whatsoever. "I'm bored." "Me too." Alyssa chimed in, Emma, Lauren, and I all glanced at each other. "We could play My Little Pony," Emma suggested. It was a game the 2 of us played at school during recess where we pretended to be 2 ponies that we'd made up. I was more than willing to play, but everyone else, not so much. "Sure," I chirped. "No," everyone else groaned. "I'm hungry," Haley complained. "We can go eat some of the snacks," I suggested half-heartedly, referring to the store-bought plate of baby carrots, grape tomatoes, broccoli, chopped celery, and ranch dressing my mom had prepared for us to snack on while we waited for the pizza to arrive. To 5 kids under the age of 10, this was less than appetizing. "But broccoli is yucky," Haley whined, once again stating what everyone else was too polite to say. "I want chocolate." Chocolate sounded much tastier than the vegetables and ranch. I remembered that we somehow still had plenty of candy left over from Halloween, and as soon as I mentioned this, we were ready to plot a caper. Lauren took control and made the plan. Haley was the lookout. She would check to make sure there were no adults in the kitchen or the living room, where we'd be visible. If the coast was clear, we'd hurry to the kitchen and grab one of the swivelly bar chairs. I was the best at climbing, so I would climb on the chair to reach the candy that was hidden in the highest cabinet to prevent sneaky little girls from eating it when we weren't supposed to. While I did that, Emma and Alyssa would hold the swiveling seat still so I didn't fall. If the adults came, Haley would report to Lauren and Lauren would stall until the rest of us bagged the loot and made our escape back to our headquarters. At first, it all went smoothly. Haley reported that the adults, my mom, my 2 aunts, and my grandparents were outside on the back patio chatting. We hurried unnoticed into the kitchen and set the bar stool in place. I climbed up on the chair and opened the cabinet. That was when my dad entered the house, having just returned home from work. When I say everyone was scared of my dad, I mean everyone was scared of my dad, my cousins, my friends, even full-grown adult men were scared of my dad. A 6'3" broad-shouldered, stone-faced ex-Marine, the guy was pretty intimidating. To this day, I am the only one of my siblings who isn't too scared to argue with him. Lauren, despite being the adult's favorite, chickened out and was unable to stall him. Haley couldn't stall to save her life, so our dad walked straight past her into the kitchen, where he found me perched on the bar stool that was being held steady by Emma and Alyssa. All 3 of us froze when we saw him. Maybe he was being lenient because it was my birthday. Or maybe he was just tired from work, but all he said was a stern, "No, get down from there." I was quick to obey, but I doubt it would have made a difference because all he did was grab a beer from the fridge and head outside, where my grandparents were chatting with my mom and her two sisters, who were visiting for my birthday. We watched him go, then glanced quickly around at each other, half terrified that we'd been caught, half relieved that we weren't in trouble. I was the first to recover, and I looked accusingly at Lauren and Haley. "You were supposed to stall him." "What's a stall?" Haley asked. "He scared me," Lauren protested. I freaked out. "Guys, this is our chance," Alyssa said, effectively getting us back on track. I climbed back up onto the chair, opened the cabinet, and fished out the canvas bag in which my mom had stored the candy. Once I'd hopped down, Emma and Alyssa put the chair back, and we hurried back to our fort to begin our saccharine feast. When my mom came to tell us that the pizza had arrived and it was time to eat, she found all 5 of us huddled on Haley's bed with chocolate all over our faces. I was chewing on a Reese's peanut butter cup. Haley was in the middle of testing how many Milky Way minis she could fit in her mouth. Alyssa was working on her 8th fun-size bag of M&Ms. Emma was rifling through the bag for more almond joys. And Lauren had just finished her 3rd Tootsie Roll and had begun to unwrap her 4th. My mom didn't even get mad. She simply burst into hysterical laughter, though I'm not sure if she was actually amused or if she realized how hard it was going to be to get us all to sleep that night after all that sugar we'd just gorged ourselves on, and went to grab the camera. Everyone, even Alyssa, who ate like a bird, had room for 2 slices of pizza and a slice of birthday cake. However, right before bed, we were all instructed to put our shoes on and go run laps around the backyard until we had a sugar crash and we were too tired to do anything but troop heavily back into the house, crash on the sofa, and go to sleep. It was definitely one of my better birthdays. What Falls with Snow by Antonia Sullivan. It was so terribly cold, snow was falling, and it was almost dark. As it is accumulating as quickly as predicted, I am brought back to my childhood. For any 10-year-old raised before the age of internet and social media, an abundant snowfall was a winning lottery ticket. It meant a full day off from school. It meant a day of outdoor fun with siblings and friends. It meant building snowmen and snow forts. It meant snowball fights. It meant preparing steaming mugs of hot chocolate with extra marshmallows and placing my 2-year-old brother's playpen directly in front of the family room sliding glass doors so that he could watch my little sister, me, and our friends play. He would delightfully squeal as he watched us frolic about in our cumbersome coats, snow boots, mittens, and freezer-burned ski caps. Pop would be situated on the sofa watching all of us per Grand's strict instructions. Gran believed if we were outside the house, we needed to be watched because, well, you never know. The backyard wasn't safe, let alone the sidewalk, streets, and local playground. I wondered if any place was truly safe for Gran. A substantial snowfall meant so much. It sometimes meant that my mother would visit. Back then, I would sit on our living room sofa looking out to the streetlight through a wide window. I knew the snow was falling from the sky, but I saw it falling best under the streetlight. Under that streetlight, I could determine the snow's strength and speed. I would find it thrilling if the snowflakes were fat and furious, or feel disappointment if they were really nothing more than a spat of glorified rain that would never amount to anything worthwhile. That anemic form of snow usually resulted in a delayed opening of school, which for some reason was far more annoying than attending a regular, routine full day. On days like that, though, there was equally as good of a chance as any that my mother would pay a visit. On that night, I witnessed the best of it falling from the streetlight and onto the ground. The snow grew inch by inch, causing our lawn to meld with the black street to become an expansive sheet cake thickly frosted with vanilla icing. Gran would not mind that I was up past my bedtime. No school meant no strict routines to adhere to. It meant Gran would be gathering snow shovels and bags of salt to be ready for the great digging out at the snow's cessation. Whether or not we were effective in removing snow, I will never know. I do know that lifting heavy loads off the ground to dump into a pile meant to become a mountain was a long, wet task that we never complained about. Gran and Pop always let my mother in when she showed up. They would give her a cup of tea and Gran would help her to shower and change into a fresh pair of pajamas. Then it was my turn to settle her in my bedroom, and I was more than grateful for that. When my mother started this sporadic routine of coming home, Pop switched out my twin bed for a trundle bed. I would slide it out and make it up for my mother. I was meticulous about it. The bottom sheet needed to be firmly tucked in. The top sheet placed perfectly over it. The quilts smoothed so that not a wrinkle buckled, and the pillows perfectly fluffed. She would sit on the chair of my compact school desk that was set up for homework and just watch. Her eyes would be sad and swollen like water balloons about to burst as she would look into mine and say, "I love you. Just know that I love you so much and I am sorry." Tonight, she fooled around with a piece of paper she had torn out of my notebook. She was jotting something or aimlessly scribbling. I didn't think much of it. She was always inordinately weak and tired, a lifeless rag doll who miraculously figured some way to move. Gran remarked pitifully to Pop that she looked like death. I hated that. It was a frightening thing to say, and even more frightening that when Gran first used to say such a dark thing, she would be visibly upset. Now she simply stated it in a way that made me think she did not care anymore. She did though. I know she more than did. Once my mother got into the bed, she would crawl herself into a tight fetal position, burying her head deep into the pillows so I could only see her hair. She hardly moved at all, but when she did, it was in the form of a sudden, violent quiver. Her breathing was far from normal. It would constantly go from soft and steady to ragged and irregular. I never slept. I stroked her hair and watched over her. I worried that she might stop breathing altogether. In the morning, I struggled to keep tears from my eyes as she gathered her two oversized tote bags with the few things she had brought and with the things that my Gran and Pop would give her, like sandwich bags filled with snacks and bottles of Perrier water. They hesitantly gave her money too. That morning was the same, except that after my mother hugged me goodbye and I eventually heard the front door shut with a click that was my cue to let out all my tears, I heard the front door open again. Then my bedroom door opened, and my mother rushed in. Before I could figure out why she was back, she dropped her bags and gave me the tightest hug I ever felt. Then she quickly left. This only prolonged my sadness until eventually I joined the household to help with all the things that needed to be done. Later that day, it started to snow again and continued into the night. I was overjoyed when the phone rang after dinner. I knew it was the call that would inform us that school would be closed again, and it was. When I went to my room, I made up the trundle bed in case my mother returned. I felt a scrap of paper as I was fluffing up the pillows. It was the page my mother tore from my notebook. It consisted of pictures she had drawn. They were a stack of small, childlike drawings. On the bottom was a little house, a nearly perfect square with 2 windows, a door and a triangle roof. Above that was the same house with several thick weeds sprouting out from the foundation and windows. Above that was a sun, above that a rainbow, and above that a bold smiley face that was much larger than all the other drawings. After a while I folded it carefully and placed it in my jewelry box. I would save it forever, whatever it meant. The next day was much the same as the day before, except my mother did not visit the night before. After I helped Gran get my baby brother and sister to bed, I had the privilege as the oldest child to stay up and hang out with my grandparents in the family room. They watched the news as I read my latest Nancy Drew novel. Without warning, my grandmother got up to turn up the volume on the television. I put my book down to pay attention. Something must be happening in the world that was of concern to us. Something major, like when Nixon resigned. I looked at the screen to see a newscaster in front of a city row house that had clearly burned down. It was a distorted figure of gray-black wreckage that seemed to smolder. I heard him say that the police believed it had been an abandoned house occupied by homeless drug users who set a fire of some sort to keep warm. The fire got out of control and the house burned, leaving no survivors. My grandmother rose abruptly from the sofa and turned off the television. It was then that I knew that the weeds in the pictures were badly drawn flames and that my mother had said goodbye. Ted, by Leila Shadamaisby. As she entered the secondhand store, Lucy coughed. A cloud of dust engulfed her face. a sign perhaps of limited customers. She coughed again, trying to be as quiet as possible. "Are you all right, dear?" The old man behind the counter gazed at her with concerned eyes. Lucy nodded, stifling a sneeze. "Have a good browse, and if you need help with anything, just let me know." The man's eyes were warm and gentle. "Thank you." Lucy smiled. She stood for a moment, drinking in the quirky little shop. The third one that day. She was amazed at how much could be crammed on the shelves, how many knickknacks were piled one upon the other, how the shop itself could look so small but have so many corners and passages. How were you supposed to find anything in a place like this? Lucy wandered the aisles, lightly touching antique chairs or statues of animals. She paused at the old-fashioned lamps and grinned at the sagging sofa, which reminded her of her old grandma's. She was looking but not at the same time. A nagging in her mind, a deep-down longing for an old loved toy. Her subconscious searched without her acknowledgement. Why was she wandering through these old shops? She didn't allow herself to think, but a pull kept her going. "What is it you're looking for, miss?" The shopkeeper was behind her. Startled, she stepped back and then relaxed underneath the gaze of his kind, knowing eyes. He seemed to know she was looking for something specific. "Nothing really, just looking." She waved her hand aimlessly and, embarrassed, tugged at her sleeve. The old man said nothing, but he didn't move. Lucy looked to the floor and then up again at the man. "This is going to sound silly," she said, red blossoming on her cheeks. "But you're right. I'm looking for something. An old toy, actually. My favorite little teddy bear." She felt herself gabbling and stopped to take a breath. The man waited patiently for her to continue. "Years ago, when I was 13, we moved to the other side of the world. My mom did a lot of sorting out of toys and books, and everything else we had. She's the type to consider certain things tatty or rubbish if she doesn't like the look of them, even if she must know when her kid is still playing with that toy or still attached." Lucy paused and stared at the shelves around her, the treasure that had once been somebody else's pride and joy. "Well, anyway, she took it upon herself to take a bunch of our toys to a charity shop without telling any of us kids. And when we found out, we realized she had taken our favorite toys. The ones that were left behind weren't even the ones we really played with." Lucy choked back a lump in her throat. "I'll never quite understand why she did that. She denied it for years too." The old man nodded. Lucy knew he understood what she was saying. "I've kinda been thinking about that teddy of mine on and off ever since. And since I've been back here in the UK, I find myself entering shops like this and looking. I don't know why, it's such a long shot. I mean, hopefully, my Ted is being loved right now by some other young child." Lucy trailed off, her eyes were shining and wet. "I understand, young'un. Especially when something is taken from you without your say-so, it's hard to let go." The old man offered her a tissue. "Take as long as you like here. Make sure you check every nook and cranny." He nodded at her again and then padded back behind the counter and busied himself with a box of books. Lucy watched him go and then immersed herself in the shop, determined to leave no corner unchecked. She took her time, drinking in the atmosphere, the peacefulness of the place. As she searched, Lucy at turns stood on tiptoe, crouched low to the ground, and sat in the bean bags and chairs dotted about the place, absorbed in the items she was discovering. The odd customer came and went, the bell over the door jingling softly. Lucy was oblivious to the other people around her. At length, she turned a disappointed face back towards the door. Cold air was blowing in now, and the blue sky outside was turning darker. She had checked everywhere. It was time to leave, empty-handed again. Despite it being an obvious long shot, Lucy felt let down. She had been sure about this shop. A tingle as she had passed the doorway had made her think this time it was going to be different. Lucy sighed and headed to the door. She turned her head away from the counter, not wanting the old man to speak to her. She just wanted to leave. As she turned, she saw the shopkeeper's eyes, and he winked as her gaze passed over him. She chewed her lip and went to pull the door open. Her eyes fixed upon a spot to the left of the door. Something was tucked down on a little shelf behind the door. "Oh." She stopped, her heart fluttering. Bending down for a closer look, she saw a grubby, tiny teddy bear. A pink bow around his neck. "Oh," she gasped. "Ted. My Ted." Lucy picked him up, knowing it could be any old Ted, one of thousands of the same Ted she had once had. But simultaneously she could feel it was her own Ted. It was something she could not describe. She just knew. "I can't believe I've found you, Ted," she whispered softly, nuzzling against his worn fur. She had never been able to let the idea of him go, and now years later here was her special toy from her childhood. "I'm never going to let you go again," Lucy whispered, as she paid the smiling shopkeeper and slipped out into the night, a warm glow in her chest.